All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you as you join us from different parts of the countries in the world. It's great to see um, smiling faces and new faces, and I won't say old faces. I'm an old face, but I would say familiar faces as we join here and gather in our monthly gathering, Journeys of Growth and Belonging. Truly glad and thank you for being here. Welcome to this, what I find to be a very nourishing time of the month to connect, hear some stories, and to just get some nourishment as far as what might be going on in your worlds today and going forward. So we're very excited to have Chad here with us. We'll do a more formal introduction here in a little bit. But first and foremost, what we like to do around that is to just Chad, if you'll just share with us what was the song we were listening to, who was the artist, and why did you choose to that as our music for today?
Yeah. Ryan with a J. I appreciated watching you and really enjoy that song, which is by Xavier Rudd called We Deserve to Dream. And I chose it for a couple reasons. One of them is the chorus to that song is currently getting carved into a little rock for my wife's birthday. But we have both been feeling that song. And in particular, All We Need is running through the trees, and all we need is swimming in the ocean and this connection to water. And about a year and a half ago, uh, a friend of mine asked me, what would you regret not doing if this was the last 6 years of your life? And I said, living by the water. I grew up scuba diving. I think, at least 70% water. I love the water, and I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And there's some rivers, but it's not like being on the coast. And that question planted a seed, which led to a choice that my wife and I made to move our family up to Lake Erie and be right by the water. And it was this song is just kind of solidifying and running through me in that way, and also maybe related to like all of our stories. I love the fact that a friend asked me a question, and that question planted the seed which shaped this like major life decision that will probably shape where I live and build community for the next maybe 10 to 20 plus years. So that's why I chose We Deserve to Dream by Xavier Rudd.
Beautiful, beautiful. I listened to it several times when Chad and I pulled the lyrics down. If you haven't had a chance, maybe we'll put that in the chat in a while too. The lyrics are just gorgeous as well. So
Yeah,
thank you,
and I'll
Chad.
offer, if anybody, if you want to follow up song, Storm Boy by Xavier Rudd, get a cup of tea and go sit by a river somewhere. Drive to a river with a cup of tea in your hand. Don't listen to the song Storm Boy before you get to the river. Sit by the river, sip the tea, and listen to that song, and it will be a beautiful 5 minutes of your life.
All right. And I'm scheduled. I'm heading out right now. We'll see you guys later. All right. Well, again, welcome. As we do, we begin this with the music, a little bit of words from our storyteller, Chad. And then the first piece is to get our connection before content. So we are going to move into our first breakout, small groups, and just to kind of connect with maybe some folks you have met before, maybe folks that will be that are strangers that will soon be friends. So with that, we'll just like to hear from a few folks. If you want to raise your electronic hand or just jump in to kind of hear. So as you had that conversation in your small group, what struck you about that conversation? Brian.
Four strangers now friends, all having a block party together.
Oh, a
So
block party. Love it. Very good. Thanks, Ryan. Welcome. John, you're on mute, John.
In
There you
our group, a lot of it focused around being elders and what does an elder do for a community, and how do we, as people approach that later stage of life, invest back into community to build community, repurpose their skills and abilities for good.
Wonderful. Thanks, John. Couple others.
This is my first time in one of these groups. I noticed within seconds just the different frequency compared to all the other meetings I tend to have. So it was a great experience just hopping into a group with people to talk about being together.
Beautiful. and welcome as your first timer, Michael. It's great to have you here. All right. Well, we'll continue to move. Hopefully, you continue to reflect on the conversations with your breakouts as we move forward. So with that, it is an absolute joy to welcome Chad Littlefield as our storyteller today. Had a brief conversation with Chad over the last couple of weeks, and just very excited to go deeper and to hear more about his story and to interact as we go forward. I just do ask folks, well, how do you want me to introduce you? Those kind of things. So Chad did provide a 30-second speaker introduction, so I'm going to go ahead and use this, and it energized me, so hopefully it energizes you as well. It does bring me great joy to introduce Chad Littlefield. He's co-founder of We and Me. Forbes calls Chad a global expert on asking questions that build trust and connection. Chad is a TEDx speaker, best-selling author, creator of We Connect Cards. It's a tool hub being used to over 80 countries to create conversations that matter. Chad and his company's late founder, Will Wise, wrote the book Ask Powerful Questions. It's consistently a #1 best-selling book on Amazon. Now, if you want your grandkids or kids to think that you're cool, tell them that you met a real-life YouTuber. Chad's library of over 500 plus videos have earned millions of views. Each one is designed to help leaders make connection and engagement easy. Chad has brought his workshops and ideas, interactive keynotes to Crayola, JetBlue Airways, Johnson & Johnson, Starbucks, and dozens of top universities, and even the CIA. So with that, welcome, Chad, to our storytellers today. It is great to have you here as we begin to share. So as we get started, Chad, anything you'd like to add to that piece, or as we get rolling here?
I'm just grateful that you read the bio that my mom wrote for me to make me look cool. I appreciate that.
Wonderful. Moms are good at writing bios for us, right? Absolutely, as we go forward. So beautiful. All right, Chad, just as we kind of get into the conversation today, really just as you, why did you choose to be on this journey that you're on?
I did not choose to be on this journey back when I was maybe taking the first steps on this journey. I had no clue. Nobody grows up and says, I want to be a facilitator when I grow up. It's like not in the lexicon. But I had seen the movie Patch Adams. Has anybody seen this movie? Show of real hands, not digital ones? Yeah. So Patch Adams, for those who haven't seen it, Robin Williams becomes a doctor to really promote the quality of life over quantity. And he uses humor to really reach people. But I was so struck in that movie. So I saw that movie when I was about half the height I am now. And I was so struck by the way that in that movie, Patch was able to heal people through human connection. There's one of my favorite scenes. He walks into a terminally ill patient's room, and not the smartest and best clinicians, doctors, nurses could not get this guy to eat. He was just the most curmudgeon-y, grumpy, uncooperative, dying people in the hospital. And Patch walked in, got a little close to him, and looked at this guy who has a terminal diagnosis and said, kick the bucket, push the daisies. And he just started firing off idioms around death. And like no medical textbook would ever teach you that. But after about 2 or 3, this guy fired one back. And I think it was just the depth of empathy that Hollywood and Robin Williams portrayed in that movie. I was so struck by. And so I had my whole life figured out. I was going to be a doctor. I was going to be Patch Adams. I was thinking maybe pediatrician. And then I took a single chemistry class in college and was like, ooh, this party is not going to work out. 10, 12 more years of this, like, I don't think so. But I was still really struck and enamored with, the way that Patch, minus the scalpel, the way that Patch was able to heal people through connection. And so I kind of, my trajectory got set now on answering the question, was that real or was that just a movie? Is there some science behind that? Is there some practical nature to that? And spoiler alert, yes, a whole bunch. And so I spent the next several years studying how we learn and how the brain works, and psychology and experiential learning and development. But I think the start, and I'll finish answering this question with this one last story. My mom likes to say she graduated in the top 5 of her class at Ohio State because there was only 5 people in her class. She studied medical illustration. So, back in the day, a doctor who in a teaching hospital who wanted to teach this surgery at this stage in the surgery would say, "Hey, can you draw me a picture of this neck spread out like this and these tendons from this angle?" And my mom would draw this. And so when me and my 2 younger siblings played doctor as kids, we like really played doctor. So she would draw these elaborate wounds on our arms. And I remember my brother had this big, terribly like open wound on his arm. And the way that my mom tells the story is I went up to him, and this is probably actually, this is definitely before I ever saw Patch Adams, but I went up to him and I was so concerned. I was like, "Oh, do you need a pillow behind your head? Do you want some Jello?" I was so much more interested in serving the human moment. I forgot about gauze or anything that would actually save his life. And so before then, I think my body already knew that I was not destined to be a doctor. That said, I still think I still would like to think that I am pursuing a career as non-medical Patch Adams in some way, and really answering this question of how do we redesign the world for connection and not consumption. We are so incentivized right now. So many of us and so many of others are incentivized to design the world for consumption. More eyeballs on screens equals more money. And so we attach some very smart people to making platforms very addicting. And then creators, folks like me and others who publish content, try to create content that is engaging as possible to maximize watch time so their videos are favored in the algorithm and shared. It's like we're incentivized from all directions to promote more consumption, and I'm so interested in how we flip the incentive to incentivize more connection. And so I'm just like, constantly trying to answer that question and figure out the answer to that question, because I certainly haven't learned all the answers.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love the Patch Adams. It's been so long. I got to go see that movie again for sure. So in addition, potentially to the Patch Adams piece, as you kind of reflect on your journey here, Chad, what were some other milestones, other people or things or events that have kind of influenced you along this journey? Maybe positive, maybe negative, as you kind of think about this journey and milestones that come up for you.
Somewhat recently, in the last few years, because it's like the path of your life makes a bunch more sense when you're looking backwards. But if any of us on this call right now, if I said, what precisely will be the description of your life 5 years from now, 10 years from now, it's really, really hard to map that. There's so many unknowns between now and 5 years in the future. Whereas in the past, you're just recounting your story or your memory of that. So I recently went back, Jeff, and just mapped my story based on conversations that I had that created some little pivot or shift. And so one of them, when I realized I coming out of that chemistry class, and my whole life plan kind of fell out before my feet, and I was in this overwhelming place, I called up a mentor. And the answer to your question really is like, I feel like every 7th sentence out of my mouth is a mentor once said blank. And so I have these 7 people that I met sometimes very intentionally and sometimes very by happenstance that have very, very much shaped which stepping stone I hop onto next. And so one of them in high school, his name's Eric Tyler. He wrote a book called The Best Advice So Far. And I called him up crying, like sobbing, weeping. Oh my goodness, my entire life's falling out. I don't want to be a doctor. I can't do chemistry. Calculus is also terrible, blah, 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 blah. And he just let me calm down. And he said, "Do you know that you have a choice? You can drop that chemistry class." And what he had me do, and I had never done this before going to college, I never actually looked at the list of majors that the college offered. I went to Penn State, and at the time there was 168 majors at Penn State. I never actually just even read the list. I never even read the list of my choices, the list of my options. I just had kind of picked, and that was it, and I was fixed. And that got that 168 stat became much more interesting to me when I found out that 80% of freshmen, at least at big state universities, 80% of freshmen go into one of about 14 majors. And most big state universities are going to have something like 168 majors. And so you think about how shaped our choices are right up until the point where we're dropped off and put into college. So that was a big pivotal moment, right? So this mentor, Eric Tyler, you always have a choice. And then once I switched out of pre-med, I was in an intro to counseling class. And I'm sure I'm not going to take you through every class and every moment since college, but I think some of these pivotal moments are interesting because they have a repeatable element to them. And this one especially does. And so I was in this intro to counseling class, and my professor, Jeff Hayes, who very sternly told 130 people to call him Dr. Hayes. It's not Jeff, it's not Mr. Hayes, it is Dr. Hayes. And that was a big turnoff to me. Someone who was kind of had the Patch Adams wanting to relate to human beings and not egos kind of thing. And he just offhand in one of the first classes mentioned a dream that he had. And he didn't say much about it. But after class, 129 people left, and I walked up to the front and I said, "You mentioned this dream thing. It sounded significant to you. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?" And he was really struck. Nobody had ever asked him for a follow-up on this dream. And he had this dream of this kind of almost nonsensical English word on the spine of a book in a library. And years later, he found a book by this author, Gurdjieff. There's a book called In Search of the Miraculous. And he pulled this book off the actual shelf from his dream, and it has shaped his entire life's practice and spiritual. And so anyway, I ended up meditating with Jeff weekly for 4 years of college because I asked the single question, "Can you tell me a little bit more about that dream?" And so it's just like, yeah, when I look back, these questions are just a good question. Is just a key that unlocks a door, right? But unlike a key to my car, a question unlocks many, 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 many doors, and what's behind them is totally unknown to you until you shut your mouth and listen and hear what the other person has to say. So that would be another pivotal moment, and then I'll give you one more. I was walking out. I got really involved in this and started this. It's funny. I never talk about my college experience, and for some reason, this is what is emerging here. But I got really involved in this. Started a student organization called the Clown Nose Club, inspired by this Patch Adams thing. And the idea had nothing to do with clowning, nothing to do with dressing up as a clown. But the idea was, I had walked out of a Cirque du Soleil concert that was happening at the college, and they handed out 15,000 little red foam clown noses to everybody in the arena. And just as a social experiment, as I walked back to my dorm, I put on the clown nose and didn't do or say anything, nothing goofy. I just walked back to my dorm. And what I noticed was every single person, which was who was before in their own little horse blinder world, looked up and had some positive response to it. Whether they laughed, they said something, they gave a little smile, something happened like that. And that really struck me and kind of gave me this label or this idea of a positive social risk, right? It was a social risk to walk around in public with a clown nose on, a little bit weird. But it was with positive intent, and it also had quite positive effects. And I think I've since learned or come to currently believe that like really phenomenal leaders take on the role of assuming some of the social risk to jump people into really great conversations, right? Wow, Jeff, you said before we hopped on this call that I don't know exactly what will emerge, and
Beautiful. Well,
I
that's
didn't
great.
expect any of the words that are coming out of my mouth, but this is lovely. Yeah.
It is great. I love it. Absolutely. So, and to go a little further on that, Chad, I love the analogy about the questions open a door and multiple doors. So, continuing that piece with the doors, as some of these doors have opened for you,
Yeah.
what's surprised you? What are some of the things that maybe kind of took you aback as a wow, didn't expect that, or anything that might have been surprising as these doors open for you on your journey?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So take try to condense a 3-year stint into 30 seconds. So I got involved in this, or started this Clown Nose Club thing. It got a bunch of attention. We would do things like stand outside of a bus stop and just hop on a bus and give the bus driver a mug full of candy and say thank you for what you're doing. And that's it. Just appreciate them. Say you matter to us. Thank you. And so this got enough attention, and I was in a meeting with the vice president of student affairs in this big fancy place with a bunch of suits as a college sophomore, freshman. And as I was walking out of his office, I just bumped into these two people named Sam Richards and Lori Mulvey. And they started an organization called World in Conversation. And the mission of World in Conversation, I still to this day have never found an organization that does what they do to the scale that they do it at. But the mission of that organization is to get people into 90-minute dialogues about stuff that people typically don't talk about. Really soft, fluffy topics like long-term conflict, race relations, politics, gender, etc. for 90 minutes with the sole purpose of skipping headlines and actually transforming that story or that conflict of story into collaboration. And so 90-minute dialogues with 6 to 9 people in the conversation, and they run 15,000 people through a small group dialogue every year. Many of them students, but also outside of students. And so we had this little 5-minute hallway chat, and Sam looked at me, and Lori, his partner, and who started this, and his wife. Sam looked at me and said, "You need to come work for us." And whatever sense, I don't know if he was just desperate for employees at the time or if something struck him in that 5 minutes, but I ended up working at World in Conversation and facilitating, 500 plus of these dialogues. It was like a PhD in humanity without needing the patience of grad school or required for grad school. And so sitting in 500 of those conversations with 5,000 plus strangers coming in and starting a conversation and saying, "Hey, today we're going to talk about for 90 minutes race relations." I learned so much about how to build relationships of trust, how to lead dialogues where people don't throw chairs at each other, how to lead dialogues where people who are very different from each other end up actually, after 90 minutes, saying, "Wow, we're the same." I also met my late co-founder and co-author, Will Wise. He was the person who trained the facilitators at World in Conversation. So I was his student. And so from working there, we ended up co-founding and starting We and Me, and co-creating, co-writing Ask Powerful Questions, and creating all these card decks and tools now that are launched and being used in the world. So like from Patch Adams to this little silly club to a conversation to a hallway chat to here, it's looking back, it's like, oh yeah, this makes sense. But the only way it would ever be repeatable is to just be a careful observer wandering around the world with an enhanced state of curiosity, right? Like you need to pay attention to, in your world, right? You, the collective us, in our world, you need to hear when somebody mentions a dream offhand. You have to be present enough and careful. And I wasn't aware of this at the time, but I just maybe in that moment happened to be present enough where I noticed that comment. And that one thing like shifted the trajectory of our life. And I think every day it's probably true that we walk by hundreds of those potential doors and those potential opportunities. And it's not realistic to open all of them, but my goodness, it is it feels valuable enough to pause every once in a while and look at the door, tilt your head to the side and say, do I want to open that?
Absolutely. The pause.
Yeah.
It's just a lot of places to go here, Chad. I'm just curious as you think of all the powerful questions that you've shared and written about, which pick one that has had maybe the most impact on you when you've answered it for yourself.
Ooh. I think one of Will's absolute favorite questions, one of his favorite three questions, is what is life teaching you right now, or what is this moment teaching you right now? And he would continually, when he was around, he would continually ask that. So I'd get out of doing a big keynote, always my own harshest critic. I'd get out of doing a big keynote, and he'd just ask, what's one thing this moment is teaching you right now? What's one thing life is teaching you right now? And this was paired. He used to, when he was fully alive and well and healthy, he used to say the sentence, the moment you stop learning is the moment that you start dying. And he said that, and it kind of like went in one ear and out the other. And then he was in home hospice. He had cancer, stomach cancer, and he's in home hospice. And I basically lived at his house for the last 2 weeks of his life. And in the last 2 weeks of his life, he was continuing to say that and continuing to learn. He died with the book Wake Up Grateful open on his desk. He was in the middle of reading a book about waking up grateful while in hospice. It's like, and so I think that, like by Will's example, he has crammed that question into my DNA, or it feels like that anyway. And so, yeah, I think that's one that I continually answer and aspire to answer until I'm in hospice at some point. And so there's one other piece there that, I don't remember.
That's good. Love it.
Yeah.
Somebody kind of looking out into the horizon now, Chad, as we've kind of been reflecting back, which is always wonderful on the journey. As you look into the horizon for the future, what are some of your hopes for you and others as you're on this journey?
That's interesting. I have this like triggering attachment to the word hope, because Will used to say that, or used to remind me that the word hope in Spanish is the same word as to wait, to hope and to wait, esperar. It's like I've had this strong identity about not waiting, not hoping, having a bunch of agency, doing lots to happen to the world as opposed to letting the world happen to me. But I'm in this transformative space where I've connected with a new mentor named Blake, and he's kind of got me connected to the idea that our own efforts are like really futile in comparison to all that is happening. And so I've been trying to actually dial into I've been trying to use anytime I'm noticing I'm putting a ton of effort towards something to make something happen, to push into the future. I've been trying to take my foot off the gas and actually slow down and like actually just slow down and let things emerge a bit more. That's a very fuzzy answer. So I'll give you a more concrete one. I am very excited about the kind of next decade. I see the last decade, I feel like I've become a professional arms uncrosser. So some person, some head of learning and development, some CEO, some executive director has said, Chad, we love your stuff. We read the thing, we watched the video. Would you come in and speak to our group? We'd love to have you. And they'd say, we would love to have you. What they meant is, I would love to have you, and I'm going to force 500 people to go to your thing. And so because I picked up on that dynamic, I've become a professional arms uncrosser. And so I know how to walk into a room and invite people to uncross their arms, and maybe this could be a valuable moment in time for you. And that's been great, and I've learned lots from that. But in the next 10 years, this last December, and Beverly was there, and Tracy was there, a couple people that I see that were actually at this Connectors Summit that I hosted. And so just kind of as a test, I hosted this gathering. I said, what would happen if we gathered a bunch of professional gatherers? And so I stood up this Connectors Summit as kind of a test event virtually in December, with a thought that maybe this will become an annual thing. And when you create a party, you never know who's actually going to show up and why they're going to show up and what they'll get out of it. But it was a really fun party, and almost 98% of, not almost, 98% of people who came said, oh my gosh, that was awesome, I'm coming back next year. And so what I hope for, I'm going to actually, let me draw this out. The first thing I did to start off that summit was just say, in the chat, can you just type the number of people that you would estimate you will directly lead, convene, facilitate in the next year? And so all these numbers came flying through the chat. And then I asked people, scroll up through the chat and just calculate the rough average of all these numbers for me. And what the group landed on was the rough average is that every individual in that room, and at that time there were 318 people on Zoom. And so I said, okay, if this is roughly true, that means in the next year, the group that is sitting here is roughly responsible for gathering 318,000 people. And none of you showed up with your arms crossed. You all very enthusiastically chose to be here. And so I think this is a long way of answering. What am I hoping for? I'm hoping for more of that. I'm hoping for to continue to not double down, but quadruple down, working with connectors, professional connectors, and seeing where that goes.
Beautiful. Heck yeah. I'm curious to see if you found a better or different word than hope, if hope kind of had you reflect. Language and linguistics is always a key part of our work. So is there a word or other words that has been more forward thinking or more meaningful for you than hope?
Yeah, so this is, Will used to replace it with the word trust. I don't know if that works in all contexts. There is a funny thing with the word hope. You know, YouTube, so I accidentally became a YouTuber during COVID because no events were happening in person. I was like, I got some extra time. I'll start just answering questions on YouTube and see what happens. And YouTube gives you all this data on the back end of consumption data, how watch time, average view duration, how long were people glued to their screens. And one of the things I noticed as a trend in videos is they show you when people drop off. And I'd look at the end of my videos and just without thinking about it, I would say toward the end of a video, I hope you got, I'd say the word hope. And as soon as I said the word hope, people would leave. It was like this ending signal. And I don't know if that has, I don't know if that's a comment on hope or more of a comment of like, okay, I think he's wrapping up the video. There's no more value to be had here. But I think, you know, I hope you gained value out of this video. If they made it to 90% through, I might say, if you're still here, I trust that you got what you needed out of this video. Now, click the red X in the corner of your screen and go do something with it. As opposed to hoping that you do something with it, is like crossing my fingers, I hope. It's like, no, I trust that you'll take a piece of what you learned here and go use it to make a difference.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, just as we kind of begin to wrap up this part of it, Chad, anything else as you kind of reflect on where you are, where you're going, anything that's coming to your mind as you look back and look forward on this journey?
Yeah, I'll and I'll end with this, and this is an answer to the question, what is life teaching me right now, literally exactly in this moment at 11:21 a.m. Eastern time. We did a whole bunch of reflection on the past that I haven't done in a while. We stepped into the future, and I'm realizing life is teaching. I was so freaking not present with my wife and kids before I left the house today. In the middle of a move, the cleaners driving or bouncing all around. I was terribly unpresent. And so life is teaching me to maybe, at least today and for the next couple weeks, try to hold a little bit less to the past and the future, let them go, let them drift away a bit, and try to actually be a bit more present, because I'm pretty crap at it right in this moment.
Beautiful. Love it. Thanks for the reflection. All right. Well, wonderful, Chad. Well, we'll give you a little bit of a break from the talking and kind of move into our next kind of breakout to get some folks to reflect on what's actually been coming up for them. And as we do that, we will go back to your same breakouts and figure out what might be happening next. And the question is similar to earlier, but just specifically as you listened to Chad and interacted, what struck you about what you heard, what you reflected as you listened to Chad? We'll come back and get a chance to interact. We don't like to call it a Q&A. It'll be an interaction, comments, thoughts as we interact as a group together again.
Curiosity, being present, and taking a risk with positive intent.
And to build on what John Saunders said, we asked the question in our group of what is this moment teaching you right now? And it was lovely to put it in action and to hear.
I would say, Chad, you just have such a beautiful, poetic voice that you, I don't know, your language just captures something so powerful, so simply and so directly. I like the idea of taking a social risk is what the question's about. And if it's not a social risk, then the question isn't worth asking.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, thank you so much.
I love that this social risk question came up just a little bit in our question, and it's so present right now, because that risk says something about danger. It says something about harm. And it says something about fear. What is behind that risk? And wow. Certainly, thank you. And create parties. Oh my gosh, that feels good. Create risky parties. Why not? Ooh.
Ryan, you're the one that mentioned the block party at the beginning of our conversation. And it struck me that in Zoom, in a breakout, beyond the fact that Peter's last name is Block, we are all literally in blocks right now. And maybe you came up with that, but that's beautiful. That's going to wind up in a YouTube video at some point with credit to Ryan with a J.
It's better than a postage stamp.
More reactive.
It's interesting to think about that word risk in the social risk scenario, because I'm having trouble thinking of a time where I regretted taking that social risk. And so is it really a risk? Or is that just a feeling, Because usually risks have an actual downside. And how much of it is really a downside, like a potential downside? If you have that positive intent, because you know you're going to learn or you're going to have a great opportunity, or both. And I'm really having trouble figuring out where the downside is.
Well, I think it depends who you are. For me, there's always a risk of embarrassment, no matter what.
Risk of being shamed, saying something you're making a mistake and getting cast out.
Yeah, for me, it's the risk of being seen.
Oof.
Well, I also think gee, it's a risk of making people laugh. I mean, I would risk that any day, because we're not laughing too much nowadays. So I think flipping the word risk on its head, and I'm going to risk happiness. I'm going to risk something good rather than looking at the negative about risk. I was thinking about this yesterday. I was leaving a conference room, and the people were breaking it down and resetting it for the next event, and which was still the same company I was working with. And I thanked the guy that was putting up the video screen. And as I walked through the door, he stopped me and he said, "Thank you for thanking me." He said, "I never get anybody that says thank you." And I went, "Well, I appreciate you." And he looked at me and he goes, "And I really appreciate you." So, Chad, you mentioned that. And I think that's something we all could remember, just to bring that little spark into people's lives.
You just added a lovely teaching or nuance for me there, Suzanne, as you shared that. I've long had the narrative of like, okay, you got to divide risk into perceived risk or actual risk. So the perceived risk I've found in a social risk context, the perceived risk seems to almost always be higher than the actual risk. There are very few scenarios where I've been able to find where the actual risk is much, 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 much greater than the perceived risk.
Mm.
And so, in other words, we're just swimming in the fear there. So we're in fear. But what the nuance you added for me is, I recently condensed the story in a very brief. I recently flew to La Jolla, California to meet with this new mentor, Blake. And on the way there, somebody was scanning my boarding pass, and I looked at somebody and said, "Oh, happy Tuesday." Or no, at that time it was what, happy Sunday? And whatever, like not much of a reaction, but not a negative reaction. When I was with Blake, I spent the day with him. I got majorly confronted with some hypocrisy that I had been living in. I built this organization and this whole thing, this whole little mini movement off the premise of connection. And I myself was working very hard to keep everybody at an arm's distance. And I was not being connected. I was doing connection, but I was not actually being connected. And when I flew home from La Jolla, somebody was scanning boarding passes, and without really thinking about it, just being really tuned into being connected, I said the exact same words. Happy Tuesday, at that time, a couple days later, happy Tuesday. And the person scanning boarding passes, her head snapped up and her eyes locked and her jaw just dropped and was like, "Thank you." And that interaction was only 5 seconds long, but we very deeply connected. Whereas just a few days before, same exact behavior, very different result. And so I think there's the teaching they're making salient for me is that when we take social risks, I think one of maybe the best forms of social risk mitigation might be being connected and being a positive intention, not just having one or doing it. And there's probably a whole nother 3 hours to dive in about that. The nuances of all of that.
And we all should spend 3 hours thinking about that, I think.
Yeah.
All right, folks. So we are at the end of our allotted time, and I will keep it open as long as folks. Well, I just do want to call your attention if folks need to leave. In the chat, Stephanie has added some links if you are curious about Chad's work, the Connector Summit link, some other pieces that are in there. So anything you'd like to do to stay connected to Chad and the work that he's doing, please utilize those. Reach out. Also encourage you, as always, if you've made new friends today, stay connected with them. Don't wait for another monthly gathering to connect. Create your own connections. Go do. Reach out to some folks that have struck you maybe in this conversation or others, and make these connections work in your daily lives. So again, keep it open for as long as people need to. Thank you, Chad, for your story, your journey, your humor, and the fully being present, which was very evident for me as well too, Chad. So thank you again for your time and what you're doing in the world.
Thank you for having me. This was a treat.